So about a week ago, I met this amazing girl at the mall. Her name is Emily. We hit it off right away and decided to go on a date. I was really excited because she was beautiful, funny, and seemed to genuinely like me. We planned to meet up in Times Square and then have dinner at this nice Italian restaurant she recommended. When I got to Times Square, the lights were as bright as ever. People were everywhere, tourists snapping pictures, street performers doing their thing, and the usual hustle and bustle of New York. I spotted Emily standing near the big red stairs, looking around like she was waiting for someone. She saw me and waved, a big smile on her face. She looked stunning in a simple dress that made her look even more beautiful than I remembered. We hugged and exchanged some small talk before heading to the restaurant. It was about a 10-minute walk, and we chatted the whole way there. Everything seemed perfect. The evening was cool but not too cold, and the city had that magical vibe it gets sometimes. We got to the restaurant and it was just as she described. Cozy, with a warm ambiance and delicious smells wafting from the kitchen. Dinner was great. We talked about everything, our jobs, favorite movies, places we'd like to travel. I felt like we really connected. After we finished eating, we decided to take a walk through Central Park. It was getting late, but the park was still lively with people jogging, walking their dogs, or just enjoying the night. As we walked, Emily seemed a bit distracted. I asked her if everything was okay, and she hesitated before telling me about her ex-boyfriend, Mark. She said they broke up a few months ago, but he hadn't taken it well. He'd been following her around, showing up at her work, and calling her all the time. She seemed really scared, and I could see why. The idea of someone stalking her like that was creepy. We sat down on a bench near the lake, and I tried to reassure her. I told her that she wasn't alone and that she could always count on me if she needed help. She smiled and thanked me, but I could see she was still worried. I decided to change the topic to something lighter, and we ended up laughing and joking again. After a while, it started getting really late, and we decided it was time to head home. We walked back to the subway, but Emily kept looking over her shoulder like she was expecting to see someone. I asked her if she wanted me to call her a cab instead, but she insisted on taking the subway. We got on and it was surprisingly empty for a Friday night. We sat close together and she held my hand tightly. When we got off at her stop, I insisted on walking her home. She lived in a nice apartment building not too far from the station. As we approached her building, I noticed a guy standing across the street just watching us. He was tall, with a dark hoodie pulled up over his head. Emily saw him too and froze. "That's him," she whispered, her voice trembling. My heart started pounding. I told her to go inside and call the police while I tried to talk to him. She hesitated but then ran into the building. The guy started walking towards me and I could see his face now. He looked angry, his eyes locked on me. I tried to stay calm and told him to leave Emily alone, that she didn't want anything to do with him anymore. He just laughed, a cold, harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "You think you can protect her?" He sneered. "She's mine, always will be." I stood my ground, telling him again to leave her alone, but he just got angrier. He pulled a knife from his pocket, and I felt my blood run cold. I knew I had to stall him until the police arrived. I kept talking, trying to keep his attention on me and away from Emily. He lunged at me and I barely managed to dodge. I shouted for help, hoping someone would hear me. We struggled, and I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. He managed to slash my arm and the pain was intense, but I couldn't give up. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I heard sirens in the distance. Mark heard them too, and his expression changed. He looked panicked and backed away. "This isn't over," he spat, before turning and running down the street. The police arrived moments later and Emily came running out of the building. She saw my arm and started crying, thanking me over and over for protecting her. The cops took our statements and promised to find Mark. They called an ambulance for me, and I ended up getting stitches for the cut on my arm. Emily stayed with me the whole time, holding my hand and telling me how grateful she was. I told her it was okay, that I'd do it all over again to make sure she was safe. As they patched me up, I realized how much I cared about her, even though we'd only just met. That night changed everything. I had to make sure she made it home safe, and I did. But it also made me realize how fragile safety can be. I knew we had a long road ahead, dealing with Mark and ensuring he didn't hurt her again. But no matter what, I was determined to protect her and keep her safe, and I knew she was worth it. So, a few weeks ago, I proposed to my girlfriend, Sophie, in the most romantic place on earth, Paris. She said yes, and I felt like the luckiest guy alive. We had been planning our wedding, and everything seemed perfect. But there was a complication. Before Sophie and I got serious, I had been seeing another woman named Clara. Things with Clara were casual, and we drifted apart when Sophie came into the picture. I thought it was over. I thought wrong. One night, Sophie and I had a date planned. We were going to have dinner at this fancy restaurant near the Eiffel Tower. Paris at night is magical. The city lights sparkle, and there's this energy in the air that makes everything feel special. I was looking forward to a great evening with Sophie, but I didn't know that Clara had come back into the picture. The night started beautifully. Sophie and I met at the restaurant. She looked stunning in a red dress that made her look like she walked straight out of a movie. We had a perfect view of the Eiffel Tower from our table. The lights were twinkling, and it felt like we were in a dream. We ordered our food and started talking about the wedding plans, the honeymoon, and our future together. Just as we were finishing our main course, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I ignored it at first, but it kept buzzing. I pulled it out to see a series of texts from Clara. My heart sank. She had found out about Sophie and was furious. She threatened to come to the restaurant and cause a scene if I didn't meet her outside immediately. Panic set in. I couldn't let Sophie find out about Clara. It would ruin everything. I excused myself, telling Sophie I needed to make a quick call for work. She smiled and nodded, not suspecting a thing. I walked out of the restaurant and saw Clara standing across the street, looking upset and determined. I crossed the street and tried to calm her down, but she was having none of it. She accused me of lying and cheating, which, to be fair, I was. She demanded I end things with Sophie and be with her instead. I tried to explain that it wasn't that simple, that I loved Sophie and was going to marry her. Clara got even more upset and started yelling. I was worried Sophie would hear and come out to see what was going on. As Clara and I argued, I noticed Sophie had stepped out of the restaurant and was looking around for me. My heart pounded in my chest. I quickly pulled Clara into a side alley to avoid being seen. I begged her to calm down and leave before Sophie saw us. Clara finally agreed to go, but warned me that this wasn't over. She said if I didn't tell Sophie about us, she would. I waited in the alley until I was sure Clara was gone. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves, and walked back to the restaurant. Sophie was standing outside looking worried. I forced a smile and told her everything was fine, just a minor work issue. She seemed relieved, and we went back inside to finish our dessert. The rest of the night was a blur. I was so distracted thinking about what Clara might do next. I knew I had to be careful. Sophie couldn't find out about her. The next few weeks were tense. Clara sent me threatening messages and I had to be on high alert all the time. I felt like I was living a double life, constantly looking over my shoulder, worried that Clara would show up and blow everything up. I tried to focus on the wedding plans, spending as much time with Sophie as possible. But the stress was getting to me. One evening, Sophie and I were having a quiet dinner at home when my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Clara, saying she was outside and wanted to talk. I froze, trying to think of an excuse to leave without raising Sophie's suspicions. I told Sophie I needed to run to the store to get some wine for us. She smiled and told me to hurry back. I stepped outside and sure enough, Clara was there. She looked desperate, telling me she couldn't live without me and that she was going to tell Sophie everything if I didn't come clean. I was at my breaking point. I couldn't let this continue. I told Clara we needed to end things for good and that I was committed to Sophie. Clara broke down in tears, but I stood my ground. After what felt like an eternity, she finally left, but not before warning me again that she would tell Sophie if I didn't. I went back inside trying to act normal, but Sophie could tell something was off. She asked if everything was okay, and I just nodded, forcing a smile. I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly in fear of Clara ruining everything. I had to make sure my soon-to-be wife didn't find out about her. In the end, I decided to come clean to Sophie. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I sat her down and told her everything about Clara and the mess I had created. Sophie was devastated, but she appreciated my honesty. It took a long time, but we worked through it together. Now, we're stronger than ever. We got married and Clara is out of our lives for good. But I learned a hard lesson about honesty and the consequences of my actions. I'll never forget that night in Paris and how close I came to losing everything.